So, I'll be honest, I'm pretty worried about the upcoming live action remake of The Little Mermaid. I'm quite worried that yet another childhood classic is going to be butchered right in front of our eyes for a pointless cash grab that completely tarnishes the story and the original film. Previously, I've been quite optimistic about the Disney live actions. I actually do think a lot of them are genuinely good, and have been able to set themselves apart from the original Disney animation in really fun and interesting ways, striking the right balance between nostalgia and something fresh and new. But since the transition from theatrical releases to Disney Plus exclusivity, it does feel like the quality's dropped off a cliff quite heavily. We had the Lady and the Tramp remake, which, honestly, that's gotta be the most forgettable Disney film ever, right? I know for a fact I've watched it, but I couldn't tell you a single thing about who was in it, or what happened. And then we have Mulan, which was a visual marvel, but the story fell flat and it lacked the magic and the atmosphere of the animated version. Cruella was genuinely good, and I won't hear a word otherwise. A great performance, a great reimagining of a classic character, visually interesting, ticked all the boxes of what you should be doing when you're remaking a film, doing something fresh, but also doing something a bit familiar. It struck that right balance, and it is the bright spot of this era. Because after that, we come to two of the worst live action remakes that Disney's ever made. Perhaps just the worst. We have Pinocchio, which is just awful, one of the worst films Disney's ever released, and then they followed up with Peter Pan and Wendy only recently, which in my eyes is even worse. Just two truly god-awful films back to back. Really just cementing that Made for Disney Plus is simply the new Made for DVD. Low budget flicks made to try and get as much money out of your pocket as possible by capitalizing on your nostalgia. And so, I guess that's why I'm majorly worried by this film, because it has so much potential to go horribly wrong. I'm not foolish. The soundtrack, from what I've heard so far, is top tier. There should be no doubting that that will be good. When they're singing, Disney rarely flops. And there's Menken, Lin-Manuel, a talented cast. I'm sure it's going to sound great, the songs are going to be good. And on top of that, if nothing else, the cinematography of the human world is going to be great. For God's sake, pretty sure they filmed those parts in Sardinia mostly. You'd have to be a complete and utter hack to fail at making that look good. And from what we've seen with the trailers, yeah, it does look good. But you know what? Peter Pan also had great cinematography and landscape shots. So did Pinocchio, now I mention it, and yet despite that, those films were trash. And that really is an understatement. They failed on so many other levels. And the ways in which these films failed really are quite similar to one another, and thus, I'm worried it's going to keep moving forward with this film as well, and it'll fail in the same ways. And yeah, like I said, not worried from a musical perspective, or even the actors really. Peter Pan was bogged down by pretty crap performances across the board, but this film seems to have a decent cast, so I'm cautiously optimistic, and there's far less child acting here. But the script itself? That's a different story, because a bad script begets a bad performance in many instances, and we're already seeing it. The dude that plays Triton, Javier Bardem, I know he's a good actor, better than good. The dude is an Oscar winner, multiple time nominee, and somehow the lines they have him spouting come out so wooden, so lifeless. They don't feel natural. You went to the above world. He says that in the trailer itself. Like, what is that? Like, yeah, it's just one line. But to me, it's a symptom of a larger problem that I've seen across all of these films. And it's something that, judging by the trailer, is going to carry over into this film too. People talk weirdly, unnaturally, like they're not real people. And yes, I realize in film, people don't always talk as you would in real life. But it's a trend that I'm seeing more and more in these live actions, that their turn of phrase is, I don't know, just slightly off. It's hard to explain. It's like an alien who's learned English watching TV, and so you understand what they're saying, but it just feels wrong. Wrong in a way that's hard to put your finger on. But it's there, lurking in the background, like audio uncanny valley. And it's a relatively small thing in the grand scheme of things, but all of these small instances eventually add up. And so the performances start to feel lacking, and the scenes lifeless and lackluster. And in the end, the films feel rather dull in that way. And that's what I fear for this film. Because unlike in Peter Pan, where you can brush that off as child acting, or in Pinocchio, where the actors have to work with CGI characters a lot, which makes things a lot harder, here, there's not as many excuses. Yeah, there's some CGI characters, but there's also a number of pivotal scenes where actual adult actors have to interact with one another. The Triton scene, like I mentioned, his clashes with Ariel and Ursula, all the scenes on land, it all adds up. And if the dialogue's written badly or shoddily, the film's in big trouble. And so I'm very nervous, because their track record is terrible. Hire better writers. But that's not my only quibble in the writing. I'm also kind of nervous that they're going to try and make things overly complex, overly convoluted. I mean, for starters, look at the announced runtime. The original animated version, 83 minutes. The new version, apparently it's going to get up to 135 minutes, which already that's got my eyebrows raising just a little bit, because it's almost a whole hour slapped on top of the film right there. And already, the first movie's pretty tight as a whole. It flows well, it's action-packed, a bunch of great songs, doesn't linger. Probably the only thing is that it rushes the romance quite a bit. And so I get wanting to make that longer. In all honesty, they should extend that out. Love at first sight's one thing, but draw it out. Make people go on a journey with it. Make her want to go on land to experience human life, not just to win his heart. I don't know. Just give it some more substance. But you do not need an hour for that, I promise you. So what's going on here? They extending the song lengths? Maybe, but surely you couldn't add that much runtime. Neither would the new songs. Maybe a more extended action finale, but even then, a whole new hour has been added. And so suddenly, my fear of bloat is coming into things. Narrative bloat is a real thing in these remakes. Mulan and Peter Pan add on like 30 minutes, and they suffer for it. Things slow down. They want to add time, but they don't know how to fill it up, so you end up with a lot of nothing scenes where almost nothing happens. And nobody actually says anything of note. It's basically just dead air. And that's from just half an hour. What could be so significant, so game-changing for the film, that it needs a full hour to be added on? Sometimes less is more. And since the quality of the additions have been dubious in Disney's latest offerings, I'm thinking that this film's quickly going to become a chore to sit through as well. But there's more, because there's another trend that I'm noticing in these newer remakes that doesn't always pan out very well. And that's really the need to make everything feel more complex than it was before, to add depth. And yeah, sometimes that's good, and it works out well. You see it in Maleficent. They gave a backstory and a reason as to why she is the way she is, and it completely reframes the context of the story, and adds a whole lot more needed depth to what was originally just a classic good versus evil story. Similarly, Cinderella delves into the backstory of the stepmother and her dynamic with Cinderella, and then also extends the romance with the prince, making it slightly less rushed. Slightly. And honestly, that turned into a pretty decent film as well. One of the better ones of the early days. But a lot of times, these additions don't work. For example, in Pinocchio, they decide that Pinocchio needs some added incentive to change. And so they add a confidant character. Someone that travels with the troupe. Another puppeteer. And so they alter things. They make him change very early on and learn from this random dancer in the troupe. And so suddenly, his arc stops, and everything after that happens to him, not because he did anything wrong, but because he's just a little bit unlucky, which in turn damages his arc. It changed the heart of the story. Instead of the naughty little boy who keeps making mistakes and learns over time, he's a little boy who makes one mistake and then is just unlucky again and again. It's not exactly the most compelling narrative ever, and then again we see this happen in Peter Pan. They try to add more complexity and depth to the relationship between Peter Pan and Hook. They want to add a bit of sympathy to the character. A character who doesn't need it, as it lessens him, whilst also making Peter feel more grey. But in the context of the film, and the way it's done, Peter just comes across as a dickhead. And so now I'm in two minds. Because on one hand, improving the actual romance of The Little Mermaid and fleshing out Ariel's character, like they did for Cinderella, that would be very good. It would add to her, make the story a bit more robust, and make her more than just a romantic interest, fleshing out her desire to explore the human world that's hinted at early in the animation. That would be really good. But it's this sympathetic villain trend that gives me pause. Disney keeps doing it, and unless you frame the film around that villain, like they do with Cruella or Maleficent, it just doesn't work. Because they try to make the character feel more realistic or deep or whatever, add some sympathy, but still be evil. And in the end, it muddles the narrative. Not everybody needs some redemption. Sometimes people just suck because they suck. And it ruined Hook. He ended up as this sad, self-pitying loser as opposed to the pompous twit you see in the original. I know which one's better. It's very clear. And since they've done it again and again, I'm worried that it's going to come back. Especially in this film because they have an extra hour tacked on. Is that going to be dedicated to, I don't know, giving Ursula a bit more of an arc? What, did Triton stand her up on a date or something like that? It's just something I don't think is needed. But it's something that is becoming more and more prevalent in this day and age. The obsession with grey morality and making characters and stories more complex. But like I said earlier, less is more. And sometimes a classic good versus evil parable can make for a very compelling story. There's a reason that Little Mermaid kicked off the Disney Renaissance. Don't fix what's not broken. And so, we come to my final real fear for The Little Mermaid. And it's less of a story point or screenplay idea, but more a fear for the visuals. Like I said earlier in the story, Disney is very good at certain aspects. Landscapes, environments, scenery, cinematography, all very good and well shot. But the problem is, I feel like the quality of their visual effects, as in their CGI, is at an all-time low, especially for the remakes, but even delving into Marvel. Pinocchio was not a visual feast. It felt undercooked, underdone, and at times during Peter Pan I thought, eh. And this is surely going to be at least as CGI heavy as Pinocchio. The underwater scenes, all of Ariel's animal friends. And those animal friends, they're not cutesy cartoons anymore, but more realistic renditions, which, as we saw in the Lion King remake, really reduces their emotiveness, but also requires them to look quite realistic. And from what I've seen in the trailer of the underwater world, I'm not impressed. It really does look like it has a made-for-DVD budget, which just deserves better. So in the end, I am going to watch the film, I won't lie, but I'm also deeply cautious and apprehensive. Because from what I've seen in the trailer, the red flags, the same flags we've all seen before, they're right there. And no amount of good acting or great songs or cinematography can wipe away weak, stilted dialogue, a badly bloated storyline, and cheap-looking effects. And so I kind of think this is going to end up as just the latest in Disney's live-action disasters, which is a shame, because it has the potential to be so good if the work's put in. But they just need to up these budgets, improve the writing and the directing. They've shown they can do it. We've seen good remakes, but the latest crop, it's been lacking. And so yeah, there's really not much else to say now. So I would like just to remind you that these have been my opinions, and I'd like to hear yours. What do you think about The Little Mermaid? Do you agree with me that I'm right to be apprehensive, or maybe you disagree and you think I'm just overblowing everything? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and let me know.